All right, welcome to the Backyard Professor Responds videos. I'm going to do my response to Rabbi Tovia Singer's argument about Psalm 22. This was the one I intended on my last Sunday Night Live, but I had a special guest and we took the entire time. So here is my response. Now, before I begin, let me say I've watched dozens and dozens of Rabbi Singer's videos. For the most part, the man is over the top intelligent when it comes to scripture. He really is. He's top notch. He has taught me so much, and I'm so appreciative of him. I have noticed as I've explored some subjects that he talks on, however, that his bias warps his view. His bias distorts his evidence. It distorts his intellectual capability of teaching with the evidence because he has a way of ignoring that evidence. I want to know about Psalm 22. The polemics, the diatribes, the argument between the Jews for Judaism and the Jews for Jesus is utterly fascinating. I really enjoy it. I do enjoy getting both sides of the picture. I am noticing, however, it appears to me, and I'm happy to be corrected, but only on one condition, sincerely, since I actually do want to really know, not who's right. I want to know, what does this evidence talk about? Psalm 22. That's what I'm interested in. I'm not interested in who is smarter, who is more spiritual, who can make the most fancy name-calling tactics, etc. I want to know about Psalm 22. So this is going to be my introduction. I am going to do a full exegetical analysis of Psalm 22 with a lot more information, both pro and con, on the Messianic argument. This will basically be the first of possibly 2, maybe 3 videos on this particular psalm that I find so exquisitely interesting. I personally had no idea whatsoever that this type of an argument was going on between Jews. It's been an eye-opener, and it's been a delightful way for me to learn a lot more about the scripture and ancient history, and in some cases, archaeological discoveries, linguistics, and translation issues. It's been an absolute delight for me. This is what I love to do. So without further ado, let me present others who have talked about Tovia Singer's arguments and Tovia Singer himself and his arguments, and I will share my thoughts with everybody else's. So let's get started. Rabbi Tovia Singer, my friend, take it away.
The Jewish scriptures, the Hebrew Bible, listen very carefully, it's going to be offensive, was raped. I selected that word, was raped by the church.
Whoa, what is the rabbi talking about? Is there any truth to his claim?
So he selected his word, I will select mine. That's stupid. That's just stupid. And Rabbi Singer knows that. Let's move on.
Let's go over to Psalm 22. And Rabbi Singer there is referencing Psalm 22:17 in Hebrew, 16 in some of our English translations. And should the text say like a lion, my hands and feet, in which case Rashi says like a lion, they mauled my hands and feet, because there's a verb missing, like a lion, my hands and feet. So they're like a lion, they're at my hands and feet, they're mauling my hands and feet, which would still work as a good description of crucifixion. Or could it be that other ancient texts and translations indicate that the correct reading is they pierced? So let's take a look at what Rabbi Singer says, clip number 3.
Before I even go into this, why isn't this quoted in the Christian Bible? That means if first century Christians believed that it's said, and that means of real lying, and the first follows Yeshua, okay, I play by the rules, believe that said, they pierced my hands and my feet. You have to believe that they didn't think that was an important enough verse to quote.
Actually, very surprising again. Yeshua himself hanging on the cross quotes from Psalm 22:1, drawing our attention to the entire psalm. That's one reason he cries it out on the cross, to draw our attention to the psalm.
Now, this is a very important point. This is a very important moment in this argument, because if the New Testament doesn't fulfill what Rabbi Singer assumes and expects, then it can't possibly be right. It's got to conform to his expectation, or it's all wrong. That is entirely subjective. That's not how this works in any manner. But let's move on.
You won't know it hit you. But you might ask the question, well, how do you know I'm telling the truth? I mean, let's say you're not a Hebrew speaker. If you are, this is nothing I've said is revolutionary, intriguing. You go, well, I know what the word kari means. If your knowledge of Hebrew is not great, just barely working, you'll recognize that word.
So how will I know if you're telling the truth about kari, like a lion, or the other Hebrew word karu, they pierced? By the evidence, of course. I'm going to explore your historical and your linguistic and your manuscript evidence, none of which, astonishingly enough, you actually present. If you think for a moment that those of us who explore the scriptures and look into the Hebrew and the Greek aren't going to go look at the evidence, but just simply believe what we're being told, you're being a little bit too expectant of your audience. I approach my studies with a healthy dose of skepticism until I see where the evidence leads. And in this case, because this argument is so fascinating to me from both sides of this Jewish issue, that I have no recourse but to go with the evidence. So as energetically and as confidently and as powerfully as you are speaking, that's irrelevant to me. Where's your evidence? That's my issue.
New content goes up. Rabbi Singer recognizes that Psalm 22 is a significant threat to his Jewish theology because of its overtly Christological properties, meaning that it refers to or that it's about Christ.
And this is why I suspect that the bias gets in the way of his interpretation. His prejudice is so strong against the Christianity and against any type of a messianic prophecy for Jesus that he comes unglued and he makes all sorts of polemical, outrageous claims that, and quite frankly, they raped the Bible. That simply meant to shock us. It doesn't shock me. It amuses me that a rabbi of such keen intelligence can resort to such a childish comment. What's the evidence?
So maybe you're wondering why in the world Golan and I would be talking about this verse. And actually, there are some videos on YouTube, and we've heard this. Some of the claims of anti-missionaries that are trying to, in some ways, try to tell Christians that their version of the Bible, their Old Testament, has been corrupted, yes. Right? And so some of the claims about the anti-missionaries, particularly with this verse, they would claim, first of all, the Christians, claim one, the Christians corrupted the original Hebrew, which says, like a lion, and they changed it to they pierced after the time of Jesus in order to prove that Psalm 22 prophesied the crucifixion.
And the anti-missionaries like to emphasize the Christian Bible versus the Jewish Bible, the Correct. Christian Bible.
Correct.
Now understand, neither one of these two are Christians. They're Jewish. Just realize that not all Jews agree with each other as well, and there's very many Jews who disagree with the vehement way an argument is presented without any evidence, but just based on authority. This type of, from a Mormon background, Tovia Singer is reminding me dramatically of the Bruce R. McConkie approach from Mormonism back in the 1970s and 80s. Authoritative, dogmatic, doctrinaire, and I am strictly correct. And that doesn't work. Let's keep looking.
Did the Christians corrupt the text? Okay, let's talk about it.
Yes, I don't believe they did.
So some of the evidence. So for instance, we actually know that they found in Nachal Hever, Dead Sea Scrolls,
Which is the Qumran.
they found a text. I realize that it's a bit argued whether, what does it read karu or ka'ari? Is it a verb? But
it wasn't corrupted by Christians.
correct.
That's for sure.
Correct. So we actually have ancient Hebrew support that it wasn't corrupted. We also know that all the ancient versions other than the Masoretic text, and the Midrash Yalkut Shimoni.
There's even a rabbinic midrash that uses a verb, either witchcraft or digging, but uses the verb for this like a lion. It doesn't use a lion, it uses the verb.
So you're saying that originally that these Jewish versions, right, the Jewish ancient versions and the Jewish interpretations understood this word as a verb. They did something to my hands and feet.
They had to grammatically. They had to use it. They knew that it must be a verb.
Because the Masoretic text doesn't make sense as it reads.
Exactly.
Okay. The Old Greek translation, okay, they dug out or they bore holes in my hands and my feet, okay? So, we know therefore that the Hebrew text, that the translator that translated this into Greek, he had a Hebrew that said either kahu or ka'ahu,
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah, digging, making holes, piercing, something like that.
So the bottom line, okay, based on the textual evidence.
No corruption.
Are you sure the Christians didn't later on corrupt the Hebrew
We
text?
have no evidence that any Christian ever in the first century or before corrupted the text. No evidence whatsoever.
So we actually have a pre-Christian debate
Exactly.
as to whether this text read, they pierced,
Or like a lion.
or they bound,
Yeah.
or like a lion, my
Exactly.
hands and my feet.
I've watched several of Rabbi Singer's videos on this particular subject. I have never seen him show this kind of ancient Hebrew difficulty with this text. He completely acts like it doesn't exist, and yet these two Jewish gentlemen have found evidence to entirely destroy Rabbi Singer's biased, prejudiced claim that, oh, it's always the Christians' fault. They're the ones who changed the text. It's a conspiracy. They're evil. They're bad. They're making us Jews victims of our own text, etc. None of that holds water based on the evidence so far as I've found. But we're not done yet.
Hey, just barely working. You'll recognize that word. But let's say you don't speak Hebrew at all. Well, how do you know I'm telling the truth? Maybe Rabbi Singer and the other bunch of his Jews who deny Christ, who are enemies of the Lord, they don't want people to believe in Jesus, so the Jews changed it. That means that this passage always said they pierced my hands and my feet.
You notice his rhetorical twist, which is useless in light of the evidence that we now know that it's not even a matter of the Jews changing anything. That's actually a straw man based on the manuscript evidence. Yeah, there's difficulty because we're dealing with handwritten manuscripts, which I will show tonight through Michael Brown's analysis. So this whole idea of conspiracy, wanting to place blame somewhere, well, it's either you Christians' fault or you Christians are going to say, we Jews changed it. Maybe neither one of you changed it. It's just extremely difficult to understand what the ancient manuscript traditions show us. There is no conspiracy, but there is somewhat technical difficulty. I think that's more in line with this issue that's facing us. Let's keep looking.
The Jewish scriptures, the Hebrew Bible, listen very carefully, this is going to be offensive, was raped. I selected that word, was raped by the church, not by these innocent, sweet Baptists from Arkansas. These young men and women have no idea this has been done. Was altered by the church in order to make it appear Christological. This was done in the 2nd century, a very long time ago.
That's pure bunk. It was not done in the 2nd century. It's astonishing to see such a vastly intelligent man make such an unhistorical, non-evidenced argument simply to get a dig in on the Christian church, which he is biased against. That doesn't work.
What did the church do? It's mind-blowing. So imagine you've got these words like a line that my hands and my feet, and you've got it on Microsoft Word. You selected the words like a line, so you have now white letters on a blue background, okay? You tap your delete key, they disappear. And then you type in, they pierced. The text now is made to read, they pierced my hands and my feet.
Wow, okay, so that brings up a couple questions. First of all, what's the correct interpretation of this verse? And secondly, if the Hebrew phrase was changed, was it because of some sort of deceitful editing on the part of the Christian translators? Because if so, that would open up a huge can of worms. Now we'd have to look at all the verses in the Christian Old Testament and wonder if they're accurate.
And of course, this whole example is entirely asinine. It didn't happen like that at all, but Rabbi Singer wants to get us to distrust his opponent, and so he invents stupid stories like this that have absolutely no application at all of the evidence that we have. It astonishes me that he's resorting to this. Let's keep looking. It gets, unfortunately, worse.
Every single Bible in the whole world says the same word in Hebrew. Not one Bible ever found says they pierced.
Oh, sorry. Squirming a little bit. Okay. He's saying every Hebrew text, every Hebrew Bible that's ever been found reads ka'ari, like a lion. None of them read ka'aru, which is taken to mean they pierced or they dug through, as a biform of karu. None of them say that. Rather, they all say ka'ari, like a lion. Not a single Hebrew manuscript, not a single Hebrew Bible in the entire world ever has read that way. Ever, ever, ever. None of them say this alleged ka'aru. None of them say karu. Okay. I guess Rabbi Singer is not familiar with the massive collocation of all Masoretic manuscripts done by two scholars separately a few centuries back, Kennicott and DeRossi.
Now, let me be crystal clear. On Hebrew and his understanding of Hebrew, Rabbi Tovia is spectacular. Really, truly. And I respect the man. I appreciate what he has helped me learn about Hebrew and about the Old Testament. When it comes to textual criticism, his knowledge is dismal at the very best. And it's unfortunate for him and his polemical stance that we genuinely do have the evidence to show textually Rabbi Singer is just out to sea. Let's take a look. Oh, I've got it. Sorry, I have to remove a few of these. It's only going to let me do 10 videos. I forgot about that. Sorry. Give me just a sec and I'll remove some of these. I don't have to remove all of them because I've only got about 7 left. So now let's take a look. All righty.
Give every last Masoretic manuscript. And so you have to understand there are thousands of Masoretic manuscripts, and there are all kinds of variations. All right. So I copied this out. Okay. You can actually access the book in PDF form online. I copied this out. I magnified it. I underlined a few things. So I'm going to put it on the screen. If you're listening, I'll do my best to explain. But let's go to image 5, clip number 5. And, I'm sorry, first Dead Sea Scrolls. Okay, that's the right image. Put that up. Number 5, put that back up. Okay, so first from Qumran Cave 4Q88, with further reference, this is a fragment from Psalm 22. Now, it has the letters for Hikifuni, and they are written with these little circles on top, meaning that the text is not 100% clear. All right. But then there's Kaf Resh, and then a Vav, Karu. All right. So the Vav is not certain, and then Yadai, Raglai, so my hands and my feet. But notice there's no Aleph there. This text is from Hasmonean times, so this text is from well before the time of Jesus. All right. And it does not have the Aleph. And the most likely reading is Karu, but certainly it does not have the Aleph there, which would support the idea that the text originally said Karu or Ka'aru. And Karu, as we'll show in a little while, can mean to dig through, to bore through. Hence can be used, obviously, to cut through, to bore through. Crucifixion would obviously work well with that concept. And then, although he tries to downplay this from Nachal Hever, so these texts were a little bit later. This would be from a century or so after Jesus, but many of these have been dated to well before Jesus. But either way, these are Jewish texts, okay? These are Jewish texts, Jewish collections. So there we have Ka'aru. You say, well, I think it's just a yud at the end. It's Ka'ari. The best Dead Sea Scrolls scholars have examined this and looked at this. People who specialize in orthography, they don't have an axe to grind. They're just transcribing what it says, and they're all looking at the same pictures and then studying it in person, looking at it. Ka'aru is the best reading.
So this is important evidence for the reason that we said a little earlier, because of the claim of Rabbi Singer that it's the Christians' fault. Oh, it's them. They're the ones that changed it. They're the ones that's making this into pierced, etc. But we can see the variation from the Jewish Dead Sea Scrolls that date anywhere from 1 to 150 BC. So that is important evidence, and yet there genuinely is more than just this. Let's take a look. Let's keep looking. This is incidentally a radio program that Dr. Michael Brown was recording, and so his lip sync is off with the sound in these videos. I apologize about that. It's not my fault. It was his video. It's originally a radio program, so they also recorded it, but there was a little bit of difficulty, so just listen to it if it drives you nuts that his lip isn't syncing with the words. So these next few clips are extremely enlightening. This is not anything that Tovia Singer has ever bothered showing. And this is the evidence that makes the difference, in my opinion. This is what I was looking for. If Singer won't provide it, then I'll go to other Jewish scholars who will, because I want to know.
What about the Masoretic manuscripts? Let's go to clip number 6 here, our 6th image. Let's look at this. And Kai, just leave this up for a little while. All right. So again, if you're listening on radio and you're not watching, I'm going to do my best to explain this to you. But what you have here is a series of numbers. And what it's telling you is, okay, in this particular manuscript, which scholars number as thus and such, number 4, 38, or 40, etc., that the main Masoretic text means one thing, but you have X number of manuscripts that read something different. So, for example, instead of Ka'ari, like a lion, you have one manuscript, number 245, that reads Ka'aryeh. These are Masoretic manuscripts, Masoretic Hebrew texts, late medieval and after, okay? So it's a more full spelling of lion, ka'aryeh, instead of ka'ari. But you have the text, and I underlined it, ka'aru, kaf, aleph, resh, vav, which Rabbi Singer said does not exist in a single Masoretic text, Masoretic Bible, anywhere in the world. False, 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 false. How many times false? Well, here you have it. Manuscript number 39, 267, 270, 277, and then 288 and 660, and then some other variations. Then you have some other marginal ones. So overall, you have it attested about 8 different times. You say, well, it's just 8. Hey, when someone says none exist, when someone says there's not a manuscript on the planet where this exists, and here, and any scholar knows the Kennecott collection, okay? Jerusalem just supplemented it with errors and with variations in the vowels as well. But any Hebrew scholar, biblical scholar, is familiar with this compilation. It is just a list of the Masoretic manuscripts, Masoretic Hebrew manuscripts. When Rabbi Singer says never occurs, 0, no manuscripts, no Hebrew Bible, nowhere, and he's very dramatic about it. Well, you got at least 8 times. And then 4 or 5 times you have karu. So this is a legitimate variant in these Masoretic manuscripts, karu or karu.
The important point for me in my discovery about what this psalm is all about is this evidence fundamentally proves that any theory that comes up with a conspiracy, it's a conspiracy of those wicked Jews. Ooh, it's a conspiracy of those evil, conniving Christians. None of that has any value. That's bunk. It isn't a conspiracy. It's a genuine variant based on handwritten manuscripts, and there's where the difficulty begins to come in. It is not someone is evil and the enemy and we have to attack them. That doesn't do anything for me. For Tovia Singer to be this polemical and to exaggerate what is actually going on in order to find blame and then castigate someone and make them appear to be bad guys just doesn't convince me because of this kind of evidence. And Michael Brown is not done yet. This is what is so astonishing about this, is we have even more interesting evidence that we want to explore so that we come to a better understanding. Instead of worrying about who to blame, let's understand what's going on. That's where my interest in this lies.
By Singer, clip number 7.
This is Sheker V'chazav is a lie. Kaf, Alish, Resh, Vav. What does that word mean? Anybody? What is the word in Hebrew where I'm standing here in the land of Israel, filled with Hebrew speakers? You should all, don't tell me none of you speak Hebrew. Kaf, Aleph, Resh, Vav. What does this word mean? It means nothing. There is no such word. I'm not going to get into it. You can't have a verb with the aleph in it as a root. I don't want to get complicated. There is no such word. You have been lied to.
Oh, that really makes me squirm. Whoa, unreal. Oh, okay, so let's first start. He's going to ask a Hebrew-speaking audience what karu means, and they say nothing. It's no such word. Okay. First problem is there are many words from biblical Hebrew and biblical vocabulary that are not used in Hebrew today. In fact, I embarrassed myself talking to Israelis in the 70s when I was studying Hebrew, because my biblical Hebrew was much better than my modern, and I'd say things in biblical Hebrew and they'd shake their heads. No, this is the way you say it now. We don't use those terms. Not that they were bad terms, but just they're not used anymore. Expressions, grammatical thing. So he's going to prove a point about a biblical Hebrew word from 3,000 years ago and say, well, is it spoken today? If not, it's gibberish. I guess, though, what gets the biggest reaction from me is when he says you can't have an aleph as a root. You can't have an aleph as a root letter in a Hebrew verb. So in other words, this has a middle aleph, kaf, aleph, resh, right? You can't have an aleph in a verbal root. What? I mean, how many verbs do you have? I mean, just go. How do you say to elucidate? It's beit aleph resh, that verb. All right. To worry, Dalet Aleph Gimel, to redeem, Gimel Aleph Lamed. I mean, word after word after word. To weary, Lamed Aleph Hey. Slowness is connected with Lamed Aleph Tet.
Now, this really does bother me because he's speaking to a John Q. public audience, and he knows better than this. I mean, this would be equivalent to me trying to come up with some old English word from way back 1000 BC or 1000 AD in Old English and do the spelling and ask, what does that word mean? Nobody in America in 2024 is going to think that word means anything because we don't use that word in that type of spelling even anymore. See, it's unfortunate that Rabbi Singer resorts to this kind of a tactic because it does backfire for this very reason. Now, I've seen this argument presented by several other YouTube enthusiasts who really want to get a zinger on the Christians. Stop being idiots and just believing what you're being told. Because yes, that word means nothing in today's Hebrew, but it's definitely biblical. And he has shown us from very important lexicons of the Hebrew language, just those variations, and it's in many different manuscripts. So don't give me this silly noise that it's meaningless even in biblical Hebrew. You're showing off your ignorance. This is what it appears to me. And again, we're not done with the evidence yet. Let's keep going because this is very, very interesting how this evidence works. So let's look at one more.
What about this idea that there is no root, Kaf Aleph Resh? Well, may I just do this again? I know we're on radio, so you can watch this later on YouTube at Ask Dr. Brown, AskKDR Brown. You can watch this, but I'm just going to put a few images up on the screen. And Kai, keep the image up until I tell you to switch. Let's look at image number 8. This is from the Klein's Hebrew Lexicon, Dictionary of Classical Hebrew, one of the greatest modern scholarly accomplishments in the Hebrew language, not just using Hebrew Bible, but Dead Sea Scrolls, etc. It has two possible roots, Kaf Aleph Resh, all right? Two possible roots. And one of them is pointing to Psalm 22, the very verse we're looking at, based on manuscript evidence, some of the evidence we just looked at, Masoretic manuscript evidence. So that's a possible one. Does it mean to bind? There's speculation there. And then there's another root, Kaf Aleph Resh, meaning to be repulsive. It's reflected in the Dead Sea Scrolls. There are citations given there, etc. The word kaor, repulsive, and then it could be they're made repulsive, mutilated. Is that what it's talking about in Psalm 22? So the question is, how do these relate to Psalm 22? But these are two different entries under a root that Rabbi Singer says never existed. Not only do we have it attested in the Dead Sea Scrolls and at Psalm 22 in Nachal Hever in the Dead Sea Scrolls, but we have it used in other ways as well. So the root exists. The root certainly exists. Okay, so that's one scholarly lexicon used by Jewish and Christian Old Testament scholars. All right, let's look at image number 9. This is from the Hebrew and Aramaic lexicon of the Old Testament that started as Kohler Baumgartner, then others worked on it as well, including the great Aramaic scholar Yechezkel Kutcher, Israeli scholar. This is widely used by Jewish and Christian scholars studying the Hebrew Bible. And they point to a root kara, kaf resh hey, a root kara, meaning, and we've got parallels in Old South Arabian and Arabic and Aramaic and Punic, etc., meaning to dig a channel for a river in some of these other languages, and in the Bible to hollow out, to dig, as in digging a well, Genesis 26:25, or Numbers 21:18, or a cistern in Exodus 21:3, and verse after verse, digging out a pit. In Psalm 40, Osnaim Karitali, You have dug out, so opened up my ears. All right. So this is a potential reading in some manuscripts, and in one Dead Sea Scroll manuscript, karu, meaning they dug out my hands and feet. Again, if it has to do with digging out with piercing, is it related concept? Could well be. Many scholars believe that is the case, hence the usage there in a very violent way, pointing to crucifixion.
Again, the evidence appears to me to be very clear that there is no ancient conspiracy. There's no ancient conspiracy of the Christians, and there's no ancient conspiracy of the Jews in trying to find changes to either enhance the Christology of this psalm or to refute it. There are just simply variations of the word with its various meanings. Let's keep watching. I've got a couple more video clips, and then I've got some other information that I want to share with you. In response to
many scholars believe that is the case, hence the usage there in a very violent way, pointing to crucifixion. And then the other argument is that ka'aru is just a biform of karu, and we know that this often happens where the aleph is part of a biform of a word. Just look at how it occurs in Hebrew and Aramaic in terms of certain words with what are called weak roots, all right? So with a vav in the middle or something like that, sometimes you go to Aramaic has an aleph. So these are all perfectly plausible. Sorry if I lost anyone, but last image, okay? All right, the Brown Driver Biggs lexicon. This came out in the early 1900s, an edition of the famous Gesenius lexicon, and one of the most widely used to this day by scholars of the Hebrew language, both Jewish and Christian. So at Psalm 22 has Ari, lion, there's the references there. But then it says this, that they're suggesting reading ka'aru, which equals karu. So they dug through, they dug out my hands and feet, which would then mirror the Septuagint. They pierced my hands and feet. And contrary to Rabbi Singer, there's ample evidence of the Septuagint being completed as a Jewish work before the time of Jesus. So, bottom line.
Again, the evidence persuades me that the polemics in this discussion really don't forward anyone's cause. Let's look at the evidence and let's come to a clearer, more realistic, more mature conclusion, and let's use actual arguments instead of silly conspiracy theories. That would be my take on this. I do believe I have one more, and then I want to answer the final objection of Rabbi Singer. Here we go.
Septuagint, which missionaries love to go to, because the original Septuagint was only 5 books of Moses, and it would be later Christians that would shape the current Septuagint that you buy on Amazon. Church fathers like Origen, and therefore the Septuagint that is accessible today is not from the hands of Jews before Christianity.
This blows my mind. In just a matter of 1 hour, doing research on the Septuagint using online scholarly sources, I can't fathom such a brilliant man as Rabbi Singer coming up with such a stupid gaffe and a historical inaccuracy that the Septuagint wasn't created by Jews. That's mind-boggling. That it was created by Christians in the 2nd century A.D.? This is crazy, man. Again, my worry for Rabbi Singer is his prejudice and his bias has so warped his understanding that he can't even get history right, let alone study textual criticism and understand how manuscript evidence actually destroys his conspiracy theory. And there's a much more down-to-earth, mundane, realistic understanding of what's going on in Psalm 22. And yes, I have the evidence, and yes, I'm going to show it to you right now. The Dutch-Israeli magnificent world-class scholar of the Septuagint and Hebrew Textual Criticism, Emmanuel Tov, in his book, Textual Criticism of the Hebrew Bible, Rabbi Singer, you are brilliant with Hebrew. I seriously suggest you expand your knowledge by going to Emmanuel Tov. I turn you to page 137. I'll just read part of his analysis. The translations of the books of the prophets, the Hagiographa, and the apocryphal books came after the Torah in the Septuagint. The letter of Aristeas is about the legend of the 72 translators who all got it correct, etc., because of Ptolemy Philadelphus wanted them to all translate. We've read all that, and the claim is, well, it was only just the Torah that those translators gave us, and that alone counts as the Septuagint. No, it does not. There's a lot more to this than that. For most of these translations use this vocabulary, and quotations from the translation of the Torah appear in the Greek translations of the latter prophets, the Psalms, Ben Sirah, etc. So, since the prophets and several of the books of the Hagiographa were known in their Greek version to the grandson of Ben Sirah at the end of the 2nd century BC, we may infer that most of the books of the prophets and Hagiographa were translated in the beginning of that century or somewhat earlier. In other words, the Torah, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, was translated approximately 300 BC into the Greek. That is known as the Septuagint. Then, within another century up to the 2nd century BCE, the rest of the Old Testament was beginning to be translated into Greek as well, and we have magnificent evidence of this. It did not happen in 200 AD. I have no idea how he arrives at such a ludicrously unhistorical claim like that. So there is only limited explicit evidence concerning the individual books, however, and we acknowledge that it's fine. Chronicles is quoted by Eupolemos, and this happened in the middle of the 2nd century BC. So it's being quoted from the Greek. So we know it existed before Christ. And Job is quoted by Pseudo-Aristeas in the beginning of the 1st century BC. And the translation of Isaiah contains allusions to historical situation and events which point to the years 170 to 150 BC. So that is the basis of that. And then there is another book by MacDonald and Sanders, The Canon Debate. And I'm going to use James A. Sanders' article on page 255. The issue of closure of the canonical process is the name of his paper. The Qumran scrolls, despite their relatively fluid texts, clearly showed the validity and high antiquity of the Masoretic text. Some of them, however, witnessed to texts underlying the variant readings in the Septuagint. Support for Samaritan readings in the Pentateuch was minimal, but where the Septuagint and the Masoretic text have the greatest diversity of readings, as in Samuel and Jeremiah, Qumran fragments of varying sizes indicated that there may have been indeed distinct Hebrew vorlage lying back of some of the Septuagint. In some cases where there are lengthy pluses in the Septuagint, as in Samuel, or lengthy minuses, as in the Septuagint Jeremiah, the scrolls have provided similar ancient Hebrew texts. Other Septuagint variations also find some support in the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Qumran caves thus seem to confirm the existence of families of biblical texts deriving from pristine, quote, originals. Now, another way to demonstrate the very clear evidence that the Septuagint was fundamentally, well, wrong one, sorry, was fundamentally available in BC times is the 12 minor prophets. Jonah. Now, he dates back to 759 BC. By 50 BC, Jonah was translated in the Greek, and we have found it in the Nahal Haver Cave of Horror in the Septuagint status. There's proof, literally, that more than just the Torah was the Septuagint before Christ. These minor prophets, these particular fragments, date to 50 BC. And we have a lot of the minor prophets. Here's Nahum. Now, he dates from 629 to 612 BC. This particular fragment, again, it's basically the same role, and all we have is just kind of different fragments of it. But this is from the Cave of Horror again. But this is Nahum in the Greek. And this one is Zechariah. Again, a Septuagint minor prophet dating 50 BC. The minor prophets are very powerfully and wonderfully at least represented in the Septuagint, in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Here's Zephaniah and Habakkuk. All of these again date to 50 BC. So here we see more of the prophets outside of the Torah, but they are in the Nevi'im, the prophets part of the Hebrew text. And these have been already translated in Greek. And these weren't done by Christians because Christianity didn't exist in 50 BC. Jesus hadn't even been born yet. I mean, I hate to point out the obvious, but Rabbi Singer's argument just has no basis of reality at all in any manner when it comes to the Septuagint. And here's Micah. Now, he dated way back 735 BC. Again, this is part of that role. But again, we see one of the minor prophets from the Nahal Haver Cave of Horror is translated in the Greek by 50 BC. So we have superb evidence that all of this is available to groups of Jews in Greek before Jesus was a twinkle in his mommy or daddy's eye. So I'm not quite sure why Rabbi Singer feels the need to distort something so obvious. Surely he's heard of the Dead Sea Scrolls, Greek manuscripts. Please tell me. I've known about this for 40 years. Come on. We need to come up to speed and be much more realistic in our argumentation. And I do have one final video clip of Rabbi Singer that I do wish to straighten him out, fundamentally so, because I feel he is blatantly wrong in what he says with this one. And I'm sorry he says this because it's so untrue.
Maybe the Jews are, in fact, the enemies of God, and they changed the Bible, and pierced is the correct phrase. Septuagint, which missionaries...
Absolutely not. I don't believe the Jews are the enemy of God or Christ at all. But I do believe you are fundamentally misguided because of your prejudice and your biases. And it does warp your understanding of actual history and doctrine and belief and the evidence that is so against so much of your conspiracy theory compels me to have to say, from now on, I'm going to be very, very careful in accepting everything you say. Now I really am going to have to double check and triple check your claims, because I'm finding on this particular psalm, and I get it, I understand you Jews a lot of you Jews do not accept Jesus Christ or Christianity. That's all good. I get that. But to let that distort your view so badly that you just come up with all kinds of ridiculous pseudo-historical arguments about the Septuagint and the lack of evidence from ancient manuscripts on the meanings of certain words in order to try to downplay Christ, etc., that just doesn't work at all.